Jihoon Kang sat in his crumbling apartment, fingers absently running along the neck of his dusty guitar. The once pristine loft that overlooked the bustling city now bore the scars of neglect, peeling paint, scattered sheet music, and empty takeout boxes. Jihoon, the heir to a once vast family fortune, had spent years chasing a dream that had always seemed just out of reach. His concerts grew smaller, his fans fewer, and his inspiration almost non-existent. "Maybe they were right," he muttered, his voice heavy with resignation. "Maybe music isn't my destiny." Jihoon's wealth had dwindled over the years, spent on extravagant shows and investments in his art that never yielded the recognition he'd craved. Worse still, he'd never found someone to share his life with, his loneliness deepening with every failed relationship. One rainy evening, as he wandered through a street market in search of distraction, a peculiar shop caught his eye. It was nestled between two towering buildings, its wooden sign swinging in the wind, antiquities and curios. The flickering candlelight from within seemed to beckon him. Driven by curiosity, Jihoon stepped inside. The air smelled of aged paper and varnished wood. Strange instruments lined the shelves, harps, flutes, and violins, with designs that seemed to belong to another era. Among them, a peculiar stringed instrument caught his attention. It resembled a lute, but had an ethereal glow, the carvings on its body intricate and almost alive. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a raspy voice. Jihoon turned to see an old man with a long beard and piercing eyes. "Yeah, what is it?" Jihoon asked, unable to look away from the instrument. "A relic from a forgotten time," the man said cryptically. "They say it plays chords that can reach places beyond imagination." Jihoon chuckled, dismissing the mysticism. "How much?" The man smiled. "Not everything has a price. This instrument chooses its owner. Try it." Jihoon hesitated but couldn't resist. He picked up the lute, its weight lighter than he expected. As his fingers strummed the strings, a resonant, otherworldly melody filled the room. The sound seemed to swirl around him, pulling him into its depths. Suddenly, the shop disappeared in a flash of light. When Jihoon opened his eyes, he was no longer in the shop. He stood in a sunlit field, the scent of wildflowers filling the air. The landscape was unlike anything he'd seen before. Rolling hills, cobblestone paths, and distant cottages with thatched roofs. Confused and disoriented, Jihoon stumbled toward a nearby village. The townsfolk were friendly but perplexed by his modern clothing. Jihoon quickly realized he was in a time far removed from his own. As he explored the village, his eyes fell on a young woman tending to a garden. She had an aura of grace and warmth that took his breath away. "Hello," she greeted him with a smile that seemed to light up the world. "You're new here, aren't you?" Jihoon nodded, struggling to find his voice. "Yes, I'm Jihoon. And you are?" "Soojin," she said, extending a hand. Her touch was soft, grounding him in this strange yet enchanting place. Over the next few days, Jihoon and Soojin grew inseparable. Soojin's laughter became the soundtrack to Jihoon's days, her presence a balm to his weary soul. She showed him the simple joys of her world, harvesting crops in the golden afternoon sun, baking bread in a stone oven while sneaking him tastes of raw dough, and dancing barefoot in the meadow as fireflies lit up the twilight. One memorable morning, Soojin taught Jihoon how to milk a goat, laughing uncontrollably at his clumsy attempts. Her laughter was contagious, and for the first time in years, Jihoon found himself laughing until tears streamed down his face. That night, they sat by the river under a blanket of stars. Soojin spoke of her dreams to one day travel beyond the village, to see mountains and oceans she'd only read about in old books. Jihoon, captivated by her wonder, promised her that one day she would. As the days turned into weeks, Jihoon found himself falling deeply in love. He marveled at the way Soojin's eyes sparkled when she spoke of her favorite flowers, or the way she hummed softly to herself while working. In her presence, he felt whole, as though the pieces of his fractured life had finally come together. He wanted nothing more than to stay in this idyllic world, to build a life with Soojin, far removed from the disappointments of his past. Yet, through it all, Jihoon avoided the lute. It lay hidden in the small cottage he'd been given, a constant reminder of the world he'd left behind. He feared its power, feared that playing it might take him away from Soojin and the happiness he'd found. One evening, during a village festival, the mayor approached Jihoon. "We hear you're a musician," he said. "Our usual performer fell ill. Would you honor us with a song?" Jihoon hesitated, his heart pounding. He'd managed to avoid revealing his musical talent, but now the entire village's eyes were on him. Soojin's encouraging smile sealed his fate. "Of course," he said reluctantly. The villagers brought him a guitar-like instrument, and as he strummed the first chord, the same ethereal melody echoed through the air. A blinding light engulfed him once more. Jihoon's heart sank as he realized what was happening. He reached for Soojin, but she was already fading away. Her tearful expression burned into his memory. When the light dissipated, Jihoon was back in his apartment, the lute lying on the floor beside him. The weight of what he'd lost crushed him. The vibrant world, the love he'd found, and the happiness he'd tasted were all gone. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched the lute, its once enchanting glow now mocking him. He played no music that night. The silence in his apartment was deafening. The days after Jihoon's return to his own time blurred into a monotonous haze. His apartment, once filled with the faint hope of a new melody, now felt suffocating. The lute sat untouched in the corner, its glow dimmed as if mourning alongside him. Jihoon spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying memories of Soojin and the village. Her laughter, her touch, and her dreams haunted him. How could he go back to his old life when he had experienced such profound happiness? One day, Jihoon ventured outside, hoping the crisp air would clear his mind. He wandered aimlessly until he found himself at the park, where he used to practice as a teenager. A group of children ran past him, their laughter piercing his melancholic thoughts. In the distance, a street performer strummed a guitar, the melody tugging at Jihoon's heart. It reminded him of Soojin's humming, soft, comforting, and full of life. Unable to bear it, Jihoon turned away and walked briskly to escape the music. His feet carried him to the market, where he had first found the lute. He searched for the peculiar shop, hoping against hope that it might reappear. But the space it once occupied was now an unremarkable alley. Frustrated and desperate, Jihoon shouted into the void, "Bring me back! Please." But the alley remained silent, indifferent to his pleas. Jihoon returned home, defeated. The lute caught his eye as he entered. Though he feared its power, a small part of him wondered if playing it again might transport him back. But doubt lingered. What if it didn't work? Or worse, what if it did, and he lost Soojin all over again? Over the following weeks, Jihoon threw himself into his music, composing pieces inspired by the village and his time with Soojin. Each note was a fragment of their shared memories, a way to keep her alive in his heart. His compositions grew more intricate, infused with the emotions he could no longer suppress. The pain of longing, the sweetness of love, and the ache of loss resonated in every chord. Jihoon spent countless hours on the melodies, pouring his soul into each one. His apartment transformed into a sanctuary of sound, every corner echoing with the memories of Soojin. Yet, even as the compositions brought him solace, they deepened the void inside him. Music became both his refuge and his torment. One evening, as he played a haunting melody on his guitar, there was a knock at the door. Jihoon opened it to find a young woman standing nervously in the hallway. She had large, curious eyes and a warm smile that struck a chord deep within him. "Are you Jihoon Kang, the musician?" she asked hesitantly. Jihoon nodded, puzzled. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Hana," she said, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I've been searching for someone to teach me music. Your work, it's incredible. I want to learn from you." Jihoon stared at her, his breath catching in his throat. She looked so much like Soojin that it felt as though the universe had played a cruel trick on him. Her face, her posture, even the way she spoke, it was uncanny. He struggled to find his voice. "Why me?" "Your music," Hana said softly, her gaze unwavering. "It feels like it's speaking to something inside me, something I didn't know was there. Please, will you teach me?" Jihoon hesitated, torn between the weight of his past and the possibility of a new beginning. Finally, he nodded. All right, let's start tomorrow. As Hana smiled in gratitude, Jihoon felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Perhaps through her, he could find a way to heal, and maybe, just maybe, rediscover the part of himself he thought he'd lost forever. Hana's arrival had shaken Jihoon to his core. For days, he couldn't shake the feeling that fate had woven her into his life for a reason. Her uncanny resemblance to Soojin was both a blessing and a curse. As much as he longed to forget the ache of losing Soojin, Hana's presence stirred the memories anew. Yet, something about her earnestness and youthful passion gave him a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. The first lesson was awkward. Jihoon struggled to suppress his emotions. His voice strained as he guided Hana through the basics of the guitar. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her determination fierce. Though she stumbled over the chords and missed the rhythm, she laughed at her mistakes, reminding Jihoon of Soojin's lighthearted spirit. "You're getting there," Jihoon said, his tone softer than he'd intended. "But music isn't just about technique, it's about emotion." Hana paused, her fingers hovering over the strings. "What do you mean?" Jihoon took the guitar and played a slow, melancholic tune, his eyes half closed as he let the music flow. Each note carried the weight of his longing, his regret, and his fragile hope. When he finished, Hana stared at him, wide-eyed. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "I could feel everything." "That's what music is," Jihoon replied, handing the guitar back to her. "You don't just play it, you live it." Over the following weeks, their lessons became a ritual. Jihoon found himself pouring more of his energy into teaching Hana, and in return, her progress reignited his passion for music. She brought a fresh perspective to his art, challenging him to rediscover the joy he'd once felt. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the room in a golden glow, Hana asked a question that caught Jihoon off guard. "What inspires you? Where does your music come from?" Jihoon hesitated, his gaze falling to the lute that still rested in the corner of the room. For the first time, he shared his story with her, the peculiar shop, the village, and the girl who had changed his life. As he spoke, Hana listened intently, her expression a mix of awe and sadness. "Do you still play it?" she asked, nodding toward the lute. "No," Jihoon said firmly. "I can't." "But why? If it brought you something so beautiful." Jihoon shook his head. "It also took it away. Some things are better left untouched." Hana didn't press further, but Jihoon could see the question lingering in her eyes. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake her words. Was he running from the lute, or from the pain it represented? The answer eluded him. One evening, Jihoon and Hana ventured outside for a break. They wandered to the park, where children played and couples strolled hand in hand. Hana brought her guitar, and at her insistence, Jihoon reluctantly brought the lute. As they found a quiet spot under a tree, Hana began to play a simple melody she'd been practicing. Jihoon listened, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've improved," he said. "Thanks to you," Hana replied. She glanced at the lute. "Play something for me?" Jihoon froze. "I told you, I don't play it anymore." "Please," she urged, "just one song. I want to hear the music that changed your life." Jihoon stared at the lute, his heart pounding. Part of him wanted to refuse, to shield himself from the possibility of reliving the pain. But Hana's gaze was unwavering, her belief in him palpable. Slowly, he picked up the instrument, its familiar weight sending a shiver through him. As his fingers strummed the strings, a hauntingly beautiful melody filled the air. The world seemed to pause, the music weaving an invisible thread that connected the two of them. Jihoon closed his eyes, letting the notes guide him, and for a moment, he felt as though he were back in the village with Soojin by his side. When the song ended, silence enveloped them. Hana's eyes glistened with tears. "That was incredible. Thank you for sharing that with me." Jihoon smiled faintly, his chest heavy with emotion. "It's not just my story anymore." In the days that followed, Jihoon noticed a change in himself. The walls he'd built around his heart began to crumble, piece by piece. Hana's presence was no longer a painful reminder of the past, but a beacon of hope for the future. Together, they composed new songs, blending Jihoon's sorrowful melodies with Hana's vibrant energy. Their music was raw, honest, and deeply personal. One night, as they worked on a particularly moving piece, Hana looked at Jihoon with a shy smile. "You know, I wouldn't have found this part of myself if it weren't for you." Jihoon chuckled. "I think it's the other way around." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Jihoon began to see Hana not as a replacement for Soojin, but as her own unique force of nature. Through her, he learned to embrace the pain of his past, while finding joy in the present. But the lute remained a mystery. Though Jihoon had played it for Hana, he still feared its power. What if it held more secrets, more consequences? As much as he wanted to move forward, part of him couldn't let go of the possibility that it might one day lead him back to Soojin. The question loomed over him, unanswered. For now, he chose to focus on the music, on Hana, and on the life they were building together. Whatever the future held, Jihoon was finally ready to face it, one note at a time. Jihoon's days with Hana became the rhythm of his life, a melody of healing and rediscovery. The music they created together spoke of pain, hope, and love. But beneath the harmony, something unspoken lingered. Jihoon avoided the lute, refusing to test its powers further, yet its presence in the corner of his apartment was undeniable, a quiet reminder of the past that haunted him and the future he couldn't fully embrace. One morning, as the golden sunlight poured through his window, Hana arrived with a curious expression. She held a folder filled with documents and clippings, her excitement barely contained. "Jihoon," she began, her voice trembling, "I found something about you." He frowned, setting aside the guitar he had been tuning. "What do you mean?" Hana spread the papers across the table, pointing to an old black and white photograph. Jihoon leaned closer, his chest tightening. The image was of a small village. The village. The cobblestone paths, the thatched cottages, and the rolling hills were unmistakable. "This is where you went, isn't it?" Hana asked. Jihoon's hands trembled as he nodded. "How did you find this?" "I couldn't stop thinking about your story," she admitted. "I did some research and found references to an old settlement. It's not far from here, just a couple of hours away by train. But Jihoon, here's the strange part." She slid another piece of paper toward him, a modern photograph of a restored village. "The place you described still exists, but it's been turned into a historical site." Jihoon stared at the photo, his heart pounding. The restored village looked eerily similar, but something was off. The buildings were pristine, lacking the wear of life he remembered. "There's more," Hana said hesitantly, unfolding a printed article. "The name of the village. It's called Soojin Village." Jihoon's breath caught. "Soojin Village?" "Yes," Hana said. "It was named after a woman who lived there a long time ago. The story goes that she disappeared under mysterious circumstances and was never seen again. The villagers believed she was taken by a wandering musician who played an enchanted lute." Jihoon sank into his chair, his mind spinning. "That's impossible." "I thought so too," Hana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Jihoon, there's one more thing." She pulled out a faded journal. "I found this in an archive. It belonged to a woman named Soojin. She wrote about a stranger who came to her village, a man who changed her life. She described his music, his clothes, and even his name. It's you, Jihoon." His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, the words jumping out at him. Soojin's voice echoed from the past, full of wonder and longing. "He is unlike anyone I have ever met. His music feels like the stars themselves. I fear the day he leaves, for he carries a sadness in his heart that I cannot reach." Jihoon closed the journal, his heart heavy. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve answers," Hana said gently, "and I think you need to go back." Jihoon stared at the lute, its glow faint but persistent. For months he had avoided it, fearing what it might take from him. But now, the possibility of reconnecting with Soojin tugged at him stronger than ever. I don't even know if it will work, he admitted. Only one way to find out, Hana said, her tone encouraging, but tinged with sadness. That night, Jihoon sat alone with the lute. The apartment was silent, save for the distant hum of the city. He strummed the strings, and the ethereal melody filled the room once more. The light engulfed him, pulling him into its depths. When the light faded, Jihoon found himself in the restored village. But it was different. Modern tourists wandered the cobblestone streets, snapping photos and marveling at the reconstructed cottages. Jihoon's heart sank. It wasn't the same. As he wandered through the village, he stumbled upon a small museum. Inside, an elderly woman greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Soojin village," she said. "Are you here to learn about the legend?" Jihoon nodded absently, his gaze drawn to a display case containing the journal he had seen earlier. A plaque beside it read, "In memory of Soojin, who inspired countless generations with her courage and kindness." "What happened to her?" Jihoon asked. The woman sighed. "No one knows for sure. The stories say she vanished one night, but her spirit lives on in the music she loved." Jihoon felt a lump in his throat. He turned to leave but froze when he saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the room. It was Hana, or at least it looked like her. She wore traditional clothing, her hair styled differently, but the resemblance was uncanny. Jihoon approached cautiously, his heart racing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling. The woman turned, her eyes widening. "Jihoon!" He staggered back. "Soojin?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've been waiting for you." Jihoon's mind raced. "How? This doesn't make sense." "I don't know," Soojin said, her voice trembling. "But I was brought here, just like you. I waited for so long, hoping you would find me." Overwhelmed, Jihoon pulled her into an embrace, the weight of years and worlds falling away. But their reunion was short-lived. A sudden crackling sound filled the air, and the lute in Jihoon's hand began to glow brightly. Soojin's expression turned fearful. "What's happening?" Jihoon demanded. "You can't stay," she said, her voice breaking. "The lute. It's pulling you back." "No," Jihoon said, gripping her tighter. "I won't leave you again." "You must," Soojin insisted. "This place isn't meant for you anymore. You have a life waiting for you, Jihoon." A future tears streamed down his face as the light surrounded him. Soojin's voice was the last thing he heard. "Live for both of us." When Jihoon awoke, he was back in his apartment. The lute lay shattered on the floor, its glow extinguished. Days passed, and Jihoon struggled to process what had happened. He poured his grief into his music, each note a tribute to Soojin. But through the pain, he found a newfound purpose. Hana continued to visit, her presence a comforting reminder of what he still had. Together, they performed the songs he had written, their music touching the hearts of those who listened. And as Jihoon stood on stage one evening, the spotlight illuminating him, he realized that Soojin was right. The past had shaped him, but the future was his to create. The final chord he played that night resonated through the hall, a promise to honor the love he had found and lost, and to live a life worthy of it.